Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, here I am making another OSR video. I didn't think I was going to be making an OSR video because, quite honestly, I have a lot of other topics I've kind of gotten rattling around in my head and sort of lined up. However, Brian Courtemanche, who I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name because we are friends on Facebook after all, he asked this question Monday and on Facebook, and he said, "You want to run an awesome OSR game? BX Essentials, Basic Fantasy Role-Playing Game, or Lamentations of the Flame Princess? Or what is your reach for? Tell me why, for you, it rises to the top of a crowded and excellent field. Sell me." So I typed a little answer, to his question on Facebook, but I said, really, honestly, this doesn't really lend itself to a short, snippy little Facebook answer. This is more of a discussion. If you want to talk sometime, we can talk about it. But I figured it'd be, I wanted to answer his question a little bit more and a little more fully, and I figured, what the heck, I'll just make a video about it. Now, it's interesting that he asks about these three games because they are all really similar, and in fact, they're all based on or similar to, or the most similar to, out of all the iterations of TSR-D&D, this gem right here, which I've dropped, BX. This is the basic book of the BX set, the basic and expert set, which is now called BX D&D 1981 TSR D&D, also known as Moldvay or Moldvay Courtemanche. Some people will tell you that something like Basic Fantasy Role-Playing Game is closer. It's more based on BCMI, a rule cyclopedia, or it's like kind of the third edition version of what D&D could have been. And I'll tell you what, go ahead. Take all the TSR iterations of D&D, maybe even take 3rd edition. Go ahead and compare these games rule by rule and see which one it's closest to. And all three of them are going to be much closer to BX than anything else. So anyhow, I'm going to get off that soapbox because it's really not all that relevant. But these games are all very similar, and they're all very similar to what a lot of people consider to be one of the slickest and coolest versions of the old TSR D&D. But let's talk about them a little bit. And I'll tell you what, my real answer, I'll be really upfront, is probably an amalgam of the three. Cherry picking my favorite parts of each one and putting together a game. And maybe that's not what Brian wants to do. Maybe he just wants to use one game as his go-to, and I understand that. These games are modular, but anyhow, I've had that discussion before. So let's talk about these a little bit and talk about the differences. BX Essentials, I do not have the 5th book. I've got to get that in print copy. I've got it in PDF, but I think it's a treasure assortment. This is probably the most accurate clone of Basic and Expert. Labyrinth Lord probably held that title prior to. This one, I believe, is even a little bit closer and better. Not that, Labyrinth Lord is a great game. I talk about that and I played that. I'll tell you what, I am playing in a game of BX right now as a player, or Basic Essentials, BX Essentials. I am running, once again, a game of Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I have run and played in Basic Fantasy Role-Playing games. I love them all. I actually got, I got reviews of 2 of the games on my channel. Maybe one day I'll review BX Essentials. So let's talk about this game. This game right here, really, really accurate. It's going to give you probably the most authentic old school feel out of all 3 of them. It's got a lot of rules in this game that you won't find in the other ones. In fact, it's funny, like when our group started playing BX Essentials, we kept on saying, wow, I forgot about this rule and that rule and this little part of the game. It's nothing really major, but it's some of the ways it handles things like retainers. There's a bunch of rules in terms of like pursuit, in terms of like foraging and hunting, and just a whole bunch of little parts. Some distance and measurement, wilderness travel, all that sort of stuff. This will give you a much more authentic experience. It's a little bit more complicated. It's not a complicated game by any means, but there's a lot more nuance in here. It's not a unified mechanic by any means either. Not that either of these other games have unified mechanics, but this will give you the most authentic experience. I would say one of the things that it is negative for me, and I'm going to get rocks thrown at me, and get people mad, and I'll have people unsubscribe from my channel and all this kind of stuff. It still uses descending armor class, which there's nothing wrong with that. I played that for years. I still have those numbers stuck in my head. I know what armor is what. However, I've enjoyed using ascending armor class instead. It's not a big deal to convert either, or it's not a big deal to just use it, and that's what we're using. But probably one of the bigger negatives. Also, it does have a lot of little fiddly bits of rules. And it's not a ton. It's nothing like something like 1st edition. It's not as complicated as something like Advanced or Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, all that sort of stuff. But it's got a few more fiddly rules in it. But it's a great game. Probably the most authentic OSR experience. It does have race as class, which I like. But if you don't like that, you might not like this game, or that might be a sticking point for you. And if you want to play rules as written, that might be a problem. All right, so you got basic fantasy role-playing game. This game does not use race as class. It uses ascending armor class. A lot of parts of this game are incredibly similar, really, really similar to BX Essentials. This game you can get for free in PDF form. All the books are really, really cheap. This book, all the books are pretty darn cheap. And the PDFs aren't all that expensive either. So in terms of cost differential, not that much. One of the things I found, especially as we've been playing BX Essentials, is there's a lot of stuff kind of missing from this book. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a kind of a richness that you're not going to get playing this game that you are going to get playing something like BX Essentials in terms of just the old, authentic experience. You may not care about that. But this game is definitely very easy, very cool, very pick up and play, a fantastic game. I can't say anything really negative about it. And a lot of the tables, a lot of the spells, magic items, all this kind of stuff, they're really, really similar. But it also, it has divorced race and class, so you can play the elf fighter or the elf wizard or the dwarf cleric and all that kind of stuff if those things float your boat, and still be playing rules as written. All right. Let's talk about Lamentations of the Flame Princess. In terms of slick rules, in terms of rules that you look at them and go, why didn't I think of that? In terms of like how it handles things like thief skills, or they call them specialist skills in this game, where it uses a D6 system. In terms of how it handles encumbrance, instead of counting up gold pieces of weight and all this sort of stuff, and looking at this chart and always have to count stuff, and just uses items. In terms of a lot of other ways it handles certain parts of combat. You may not like this, but I really dig the fact that only the fighter goes up an attack bonus, so they become very, very relevant, and they pull away from the other classes and become much more of what a warrior should be. All this kind of stuff. This game wins for me. This game has some phenomenal rules improvements, and it's really slicked out the game quite a bit. And in fact, and James Edward Raji has not stopped kind of messing around with systems. And so, of course, they have the VA on Magic system. And I just talked about some of the alternate rules he put in the Magic Chicken book, that sort of stuff. I really, really, really like this game. It does use race as class, but in fact, for the most part, he's big into don't use those other races at all. Just have a humanocentric game. And in fact, he's talked about just kind of removing them from the second edition of that. So this is the clear winner for me. This is the one I pick up more often than not. What makes this less of an awesome OSR experience? Well, I'll tell you what. Some of the things, like the magic system, is different. And not the magic system, but the spell. The spell list has been changed quite a bit. Clerics are a little bit, they don't have quite as many spells available to them. All the fireballs and lightning bolts and kind of the big damaging wizard spells are missing. It's taken some of the spells. It's got some weird spells in there too. It's taken some spells from first edition and put them in here. Gotten rid of some of the basic spells. There's nothing wrong with the spell list, but it may not feel it might not give you that authentic OSR spell feeling. I've certainly played a game, the very first game of Lamentations that I played in for well over a year. We were using a spell system, but we were playing or spell list, and we were playing essentially kind of a mid to high fantasy game, and it worked fine. It felt very OSR. It felt very authentic. However, you might not like it. So that would be one of the things I would look at. If that's going to be a sticking point for you, you might want to change it. You don't need to use the weird horror vibe of this game at all. You can kind of yank all that out and just use this as a different book or different set of rules for playing, BXD&D. And a lot of people do that, and it works phenomenally. So at the end of the day, that's my answer. Is it depends. I think they're all great. I wouldn't hesitate to pick up any one of them and run or play in an awesome OSR campaign. However, I tend to, every once in a while want to cherry pick and take a rule out of here or there. And sometimes, I look at the saving throws and figure, well, actually, I really like the way something like Astonishing Swordsman or Swords and Wizardry handles saving throws even better. Or I like James Edward Raji's new saving throw rule, and all that sort of stuff. But, these three games, they're all really a win for me. I happen to pick this. This is like my go-to. This one does a great job with just being authentic, and the way it's organized and laid out, just top-notch. That's definitely something I'm really, really happy with. And this game is absolutely plug and play. No issues with the game whatsoever. You just go. So I hope that answered a little bit. It made it sound a little wishy-washy, but that's essentially, you know, my answer. So how about that? What about yours?